All right, somebody requested up, and we're over 1,000 likes. The relentless Romanian. Ooh, relentless Romanian. How you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Relentless Romanian.
Yes, yes, it is in
Yeah,
the name. It is in the name.
it is in the name. And what does that mean? Like relentless in what way?
Relentless about seeking the truth,
Mm-hmm.
telling the truth, um, just revealing my experience with the truth to people. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and for me, I'm a Holy Spirit-filled believer in Jesus. I have a relationship with Him. Um, I was actually raised in the faith, and then I left it at 18. I'm 32 now.
Mm-hmm.
And, had an encounter with him that radically changed my life. And now, I go out and preach the gospel, pray for people, seeing miracles, healings, all sorts of those
Mm.
things, casting
Okay.
out demons.
And would you say that the experience is what drives your belief? Is that your best reason that you believe?
Yeah, I would say that the two times that I tried to unalive myself,
Mm.
um, that really brought a aspect of understanding divine intervention in my life to know
Mm-hmm.
that at least God exists, but which God exists. And so that brought me down to the conclusion, by narrowing it down, that it was Jesus. And when I looked at the evidence, looked at the scholarship, looked at the archaeological understanding, it just made sense.
Okay. So you had your personal experience, and then you looked at the evidence,
Yes.
archaeological, historical, all that stuff. Okay. And then that told you that the Christian God is real. And that was the method you used. So those are the steps you took to determine it was true, to verify it.
Yeah, I believe a lot of people would rather be intellectually satisfied first and then believe, but it's actually backwards. With Christianity and how God desires to reach humanity, He really asks us to humble ourselves in order that He might be found. And I believe that a lot of misconceptions about Christianity is that people um, want to know 100% certainty with intellectual reasoning, when God is not in the satisfying your intellectual reasoning, rather than trusting in Him and understanding that He can be experienced as well, but with the condition um, of the human nature. We're immediately at odds with God from the very beginning, so it's hard, you know, to desire God. We're at enmity with God, and when we are born. So,
Mm. And in terms of other religions, like the Hindu religion, Hindus will claim that they have archaeological evidence, they have historical evidence that backs up their religion. And I mean, it's been around for 44,000 something years. So um,
mhm.
it's hard to say, to totally dismiss it. How would you explain then Hindus who have had personal experiences that verify for them that there is a singular consciousness, that there's Ganesh, there's Krishna, there's Shiva, etc.? Because you
Right.
both can't be right.
hmm Right. So there is a understanding there that there has to be an objective truth. Either you can't say that they're all correct, being a universalist, and you can't say necessarily, in my opinion, that they're all wrong. But I do believe that one is true. What differentiates between Christianity and Hinduism is, I believe, the fact that Jesus Christ made that objective claim, saying that I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one can come to the Father except through me. That's an objective claim. And so that's narrowing every other thousands and thousands of other religions and calling them false. So either Jesus was a mere lunatic, schizophrenic, who claimed to be the Messiah and who claimed to be the fulfillment of the prophecies, or he wasn't. And so it really hinges down, just as Paul says, if Christ did not rise from the dead, then it's all rubbish. It all breaks down if Christ didn't raise from the dead. And that I believe is what differentiates between Hinduism and Christianity. Now, I will say that Hindus can have spiritual experiences. I do claim that they can, but from what source are they having it from?
We have Hindus that, like, would you agree then that the resurrection, as is told in the Bible, and as you say, there's historical evidence of, is a pivotal moment for Christianity, in that if there was no resurrection, then there is no Christianity?
Oh, for sure. Absolutely.
For sure. And so if we had other pivotal moments, it may not be a resurrection per se, but if we have other pivotal moments that determine whether or not a religion does or does not exist. I don't know exactly what that is in Hinduism, because I don't know Hinduism that well, that thoroughly. But I'm sure there was a pivotal moment in Hinduism as to whether or not it was going to become a religion, and there are witnesses to it. If they are also making claims that this pivotal moment occurred and they have evidence to back that up, how do I, as an outsider, tell, like, what method could I use to determine which pivotal moment is the true moment? Or I'll say a second question after, but I'll let you answer that one first.
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. I mean, Hinduism just essentially doesn't have the same fruit, I believe, as Christianity. I mean, essentially, Hinduism is not like Christianity in any form. They're trying to do rituals in order to be clean outwardly, versus Christianity, where we don't need to do the Levitical law of the 613 laws and keeping them. I believe that Hinduism is solely trying to earn his way in order to receive whatever type of enlightenment or heaven, so to speak, that they're trying to get. But Christianity's counterculture and all of those things. It's not what we must do to get to God. It's what God has done for us. And I believe seeing the fruit of Christians and how they carry their life, real Christians, with having self-control, love, peace, joy, you just don't see that with any other religion. And I believe that's another aspect in what differentiates us between them.
Okay, so a couple of points you brought in. I think the most sweeping question I have is, how does different equate to right?
Yeah. So what is right is that the Christians live their life in a way that is transformative power. We've been transformed by God in order to live another life, meaning that somebody could be an alcoholic or a drug addict or dealing with a plethora of other things. And really, it's not us trying to have self-will and stopping those things, because we don't have the power to do so. But rather, it's God who divinely intervenes on our behalf and gives us the power to resist those inclinations. But again, it's with other religions trying to outwardly clean themselves and outwardly do rituals in order to appease God, or, it's just never good enough. But with what Jesus did, it is good enough when you receive his sacrament. With what he did on that cross 2,000 years ago, he is enough. So by receiving what he did with the free gift of salvation, You are enough now, but you must maintain the ability to resist sin with his power.
Now you mentioned something about drugs and alcohol, and so as somebody who's been clean and sober for over 12 years, and is atheist, and I've sponsored and met dozens of folks who have had all kinds of different beliefs and have managed to stay clean and sober. And I've met people with dozens upon dozens of beliefs who have managed to not stay clean and sober. So how did those people who had different beliefs other than Christianity, including myself, or in my case, a non-belief, how did we manage to stay clean and sober?
Yeah, that's a very good point. So, with God, he can deliver and set you free, in the aspect of that whom the Son sets free is free indeed. Now, you will have people who have temporary resistance towards that particular inclination, but it's not to say that it can't just pivot to something else. An addiction
Sure.
is an addiction. So just because you may have suppressed that, it's not to say that, oh, well, it's just going to now pivot to gambling, or it's going to pivot to, a corn problem, or, other various things.
Yeah. Well, how then could I tell if I'm actually clean and sober versus suppression? Like, how long would I have to be suppressed for? I mean, it's been 12 years. And then how do I so how would I know? How could I tell now?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, it's to say that just because that has been suppressed for that long amount of time, and the body can, on a physical level, without that, finally have the ability to resist that. But what I'm saying with God, he can, in a instantaneous moment, deliver and set you free from whatever it is. But again, there are people who do unfortunately go back to that, and that's where they don't have the power to resist it. But in your case specifically, I believe that there could be something that it just pivoted to elsewhere. I mean, within the brain, and wanting that same very thing, it could have just pivoted to something else. I don't know what it could be, but...
Yeah, we call it switching. And so if I hear you right, you're saying I switched to another addiction somewhere?
It could be. I don't know if that's your case.
Yeah. And if I told you I didn't, would you believe me?
Yeah, I would believe you.
Well, that doesn't sound like, because you're saying that only God can deliver this, yet I'm an atheist and I'm clean, sober, don't have any other addictions. I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, how would I know? Like, if it's God, if it's not God, if I've sponsored folks who were, from all outer appearances, were fervent believers in the Christian God, and they couldn't stay sober for more than a day. And I can identify why they couldn't stay sober. I myself could. Yet you're saying it's something else, but why didn't God deliver them?
Yeah, so I guess I should have rephrased in the aspect that it is possible for humans to do that to an extent, but it's not to say that it couldn't happen, down the road, even in your situation. Yeah, I mean, that's great, and I commend you for that. But it's not to say that it's one and done, just because you've been free from that for 12 years. But again, there are other cases, extreme cases, where I believe it is a spirit of addiction that does come upon a person to where they cannot get free. And no matter how hard that they've tried in their self-will, they could not do it. But I do know that God has delivered people who just couldn't do it. So I guess it's almost the same thing as asking, can an atheist be moral? Right? And you can, right?
Hmm.
I'm not claiming that atheists can't be moral agents, but what I'm saying is that you can't ground your morality of why you should be moral.
Hmm. Why would that matter? If a person is moral, why does it matter that they have to be grounded?
I believe that God is the standard from which everything is morally good. And for
Yeah.
us to even describe what is good, we must understand where it comes from.
Hmm. Hmm. Let me ask you this then. If you found out tomorrow that there was no God, and it's verified, so there's no doubt about it that there's no God. And I'm not saying it would happen. I'm not saying there's evidence out there for that. I'm just saying if. Does that mean that you would start unaliving, raping, watching corn, stealing, lying? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, I would certainly carry myself in a whole nother light. Absolutely. Hmm.
Wow, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And why would you? Why is that because there's just no God? So what does God do for you to keep you morally grounded? Like how does that happen?
Well, when you're accountable to something that is superior than you in a divine manner, and there are ramifications for sin, I don't believe in God solely because I fear of the ramifications of going to hell. What I do is I love God because of what He's done for me. And so it's not fear-based, it's rather love-based. And I do have a customer coming in, so could you hold on 1 second?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
Hello, how can I help you?
that is interesting when I hear people say, well, if there's no God, I would probably hold myself to a completely different standard. I may, and because I'm not accountable to anybody. That's interesting. And I'm going to ask him, I wonder how folks like me who don't do those things now, yet we don't consider ourselves accountable to God. One at a time, Robert. But I'll get to you next. I'm just curious to know, like, how do people like me manage to not commit those things? That's what I'm curious about. Like, how do I not unalive people? How do I not grape people? How do I not uh, just turn into the mustache man? Atheists do all kinds of craziness. Like what, though? The law in prison? Yeah, yeah. I mean, we could say that about those who have, those who have religious beliefs. I've seen all kinds of stuff, that all kinds of crazy things they do. The law keeps you in check. So, are you then saying, Magneto, that if there were no laws, you would just do whatever? Well, that's a great statement, Mary. What's keeping you from living that? I mean, what's keeping you there instead of just going off the rails? I would do more than I do now. That's honest. I mean, that's honest. And no judgment here. I'm just curious to know, though, like you say you would do more than you do now. Does that mean, Magneto, that you would unalive people? And I'm assuming that you unalive 0 people now. So, like, how much more? So, if Mary's saying, well, if there was no God, I'd still live a godly life, well, what's keeping you from doing that? Well, that's the thing, Valentina. I'm saying that if you found out there was no God tomorrow, I mean, that means there's no Jesus. So that means Jesus didn't teach anything. It's all fake. So does that mean that all bets are off, all everything's off the table? Right. Well, what I'm saying though is because you're saying, well, God gave us a moral standard to live by, but I'm saying that if you found out there was no God tomorrow, God didn't give the moral standard. So who gave you the moral standard in that case? And if you're saying, well, I still wouldn't hurt people, I still wouldn't, commit sins, whatever that is. So, I mean, yeah, Magneto's honest. But I don't feel like I have anybody looking over my shoulder or looking down from wherever. So I don't, I don't have any temptation. So how do you explain that? Right. Well, divine healing prayers, isn't it it's a pretty legit question, because how do you explain people not just atheists just not going off the rails? Because, you can say, well, there's laws, yet there's people who get away with stuff all the time, or just, lying is not a crime, right? So, you know, what about being dishonest or just being a jerk?
Hey, I'm back.
Hey, welcome back. So I was just I was interacting with chat.
Yeah,
So we
thank
were
you
just
for
going
waiting.
over. Yeah, no worries. We were just going over we were just kind of kicking back and forth the whole idea of morals. And would you say then that relentless, that the morality of it is that why this belief is important to you, or is there another reason?
Well, to go back to the previous statement of would I live my life differently if I found out that there's no God?
Yeah.
Um, again, I would. I would certainly live my life in a way that would just be self-pleasing,
Mm.
gratifying myself, gratifying my flesh, because there is no true accountability. To say that would I just unalive people for the sake of it? No, I wouldn't go to that extent. Um, but I do believe that there isn't a true form of justice in the earth, um, in a naturalist worldview. Jail is not a true form of punishment, right? So, in the end, in the atheist understanding, if there is nothing in the end to be accountable to for everything that you have ever done against humanity, why wouldn't it be permissible?
Yeah, I think that's my point. Is why wouldn't it be permissible? That's the question I'm asking you. If there's as you say, there's nothing or no one to be accountable to at the end, as you say, then why not just do it? And I think for me, the answer for me, I'm going to pretend you asked me that question. It sounded like you did,
Yeah.
but for me, I don't. I do as much unaliving as I want, which is zero. I do as much raping as I want, which is zero. I do as much stealing as I want, which is zero. And I do as much lying as I want. Now, that doesn't mean that, and when I say lying, I'm talking about deliberately deceiving people. Um, Even if somebody asks me, like, my wife says, "Hey, do I look good in this? Do I look bad in this dress?" I won't say, "Oh, honey, you look great." If she honestly looks bad in the dress, I'll tell her she looks bad in the dress, or I'll tell her my honest opinion. I may not say it like that, but I will tell her my honest opinion. From that standpoint, I'm trying to understand from your worldview what's keeping me in check.
Well, there were a lot of atheists throughout history who did horrible atrocities, and there really wasn't anything that kept them in check, and they did it. Even with communism, in that understanding of Marxism. Um, so, I mean, just because maybe you aren't desiring to have those inclinations and do that, you just can't make the argument that, you know, These people are not doing that or wanting to do that because there isn't a God. I mean, I really believe that because in their mind that there is no God, that's why they find it permissible to do so. And that just isn't how the world should work.
Hmm. Well, that's interesting to me because I'm sure I could find plenty of believers who have committed atrocities as well. And so, what's their explanation?
Right. People can horribly misrepresent biblical scripture in order to appease their flesh and do desires that are not good. But that doesn't equate, to the fact that Jesus' teachings are true and what God commands morally, isn't so. It just means that we are dealing with fallible humans that can abuse.
Hmm. Well, so then it sounds like to me what you're saying is that if a believer commits an atrocity, it is human fallibility. Yet if a non-believer commits an atrocity, it's because they don't follow God. That's what I'm hearing. Am I on track about that?
So both can equally do injustices, right? The atheist can and the believer.
Right.
I firmly believe that if you are truly his, meaning Jesus's, you would not have the desire to do so. There would be an inkling inside of you that is resisting the urge to want to do that because of the power of the Holy Spirit. And that's what makes us different, is that even though we could do those horrific things, there is something still inside of us that is not allowing us to go and cross the chicken line, so to speak, without a major resistance. Now, for you, I think that you have to explain why you innately have those resistors inside of you as well.
Oh, yeah, sure. I was saying it in chat. You probably weren't, you didn't hear me. What I said was I do that because well, in my mind, I have, for one thing, it's not right. And the other thing is I have empathy. I wouldn't want someone to unalive me. I wouldn't want someone to unalive one of my family members. I wouldn't want somebody to grape me or my family members or steal from me or my family members, because I know I have an understanding of how that feels. So I wouldn't want to make someone feel the way they would feel victimized because of something that I did. And that doesn't mean that I do things like I never do, that I'm perfect. It doesn't mean that at all. I'm totally fallible. Sometimes I say the wrong things. Sometimes I get angry, and sometimes I yell at people. Happens. I mean, I'm human. However, I don't deliberately go out of my way to try to hurt somebody or anything living for that matter, unless absolutely necessary. Like, for example, if someone were to break into my home and they were armed, well, I guess if I were in your worldview, I would say Godspeed. I think that is my right to do that. So I wouldn't just stand there and let them do whatever and just say, please stop. However, just say if somebody cuts me off while I'm driving in traffic, I wouldn't go out with a bat and bash their car. Because people make mistakes, driving or whatever. It's not that deep. I can let it go. I may get mad. I may say, screw you. I may give them the finger, whatever, but it's not like I take it home with me. They don't live rent free in my head. It's gone after a few minutes. So that's what I'm getting at, and I'm having trouble seeing the distinction that you're trying to convey. Because you're saying on one hand, well, it's because they've received the Holy Spirit, or they've accepted Jesus into their heart. I don't know if you said those exact words, but that's the kind of the spirit I'm getting from what you're saying. And I'm saying to you, I know plenty of people who don't believe what you believe and don't commit any of these atrocities. And I'm trying to understand from your point of view what separates that, what's their reasons, what's distinct in them.
Well, it's all about the source. It's all about the innate wiring of why is that so. There's a desire inside of, I believe, every single human to not want to randomly unalive somebody for the sake of it, right? It's those resistors within our brain. You must break those resistors over and over and over again in order to finally cross that chicken line in order to commit that act. So I'm just asking you, what is it within the intentionality behind the universe that says that you should not do this because it wouldn't flourish humanity?
What's behind the intentionality of the universe? I don't quite know what that means. So I'll stick to the same answer I gave. Is, like I said, I don't want to see people unalived. I don't want to make people feel that way, like the moments before they're unalived. I don't want that for somebody. And I think everybody has a right to life. So it is not my right to take someone's life away for a reason short of they're threatening me or my family, the livelihood of myself or my family, the lives of me and my family. So what do you mean by what was the term you used? The intentionality of the universe?
Correct.
What do you mean by that?
Who do you give credit to that gave you the innate ability to not want to do that? Who do you credit that to?
Part of that credit is to the upbringing that I have. Part of the other credit is I went through quite a bit in my life to do some, to understand a lot of these things. Because there was a point in my life, I'm not going to lie, there was a point in my life, and, all addicts do this. All addicts lie, cheat, steal when they're in the middle of their addiction. And this is just going by what I've seen over the last 12 years. Every single story I've heard is about an addict lying, cheating, stealing. So it's anecdotal, but I'm just going to go, thousands upon thousands of stories. So I think I have a pretty good breadth of data to pull from. When I think of doing those things to someone, in my mind, my state of mind now, it sickens me. It doesn't make me feel good inside, the thought of doing that to somebody. And it's anybody, even someone I'm very, very angry with. I can't bring myself to do that to somebody. And so to the credit I would give, yeah, like I said, my upbringing, I would say the laws of society, I would say, the lessons that I've had to learn and go through, the road that I've had to travel in my life, I would attribute it to all that.
But even deeper than that, wouldn't you credit it to an offspring of a sociobiological evolutionary explanation that just says that, it's programmed within the DNA and programmed within your brain wiring and just the ancestral instincts to just have a flourishing?
Yeah, I would ultimately say that too, because I think that's ultimately where it comes from. I do believe in evolution, and I do believe that, morals evolved along with humans. So I would say that as well. And there's a lot of evidence for that. My wife is she has a degree in behavioral psychology, so we've talked about this before. It's not an appeal to authority. I'm just saying that the discussions we've had, she has prompted me to do my own research. So the research that I have seen supports my belief, just like you did your research, and that supports your belief, right? So I wasn't even aware that this was a thing, that, I didn't even think about, where did morals come from? I didn't really think about that until I had a discussion with her. So I was actually completely agnostic on it until I read, information on it. And that formed my belief about that.
So, given that, is it actually meaningful when we actually do a good deed? Or is it just again, it's just a chemical reaction within you to be programmed to do this? It's not actually you who's actually making the impact. It's actually a process of your chemical functionality within the brain.
Yeah, I would say it is meaningful. For one thing, I think to that person that you've done the good deed for, it's meaningful to that person. And I think in that sense, at the end of the day, that's all that really matters. It's meaningful. It could potentially be meaningful because that person may pay it forward. They may, like, for example, have you ever been in a drive-through and had somebody pay for your food, and then you just kind of keep the chain going? So then you pay for the person behind you, and you just kind of see how far it goes. Have you ever done that before?
Yeah, I have actually.
Yeah, it's cool, huh? Right? And so that's kind of what I'm talking about, is the notion of paying it forward. And I think that can turn into something meaningful. It really depends on what the action is, though, what the good deed is that you're talking about. It could be meaningful in the sense that there have been time, like service is a big thing for me. I think for me personally, it's important to do acts of service because it grounds me. It gives me a sense of humility because I'm not doing it for myself. I'm doing it for others. And that to me is meaningful, even if the person doesn't really appreciate it, because not everyone appreciates it. Yet they're still getting something out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I I hate to, kind of almost go in circles, but this is really a very important notion here, is that there are no good reasons to do those things in itself if God doesn't exist. I mean, it's nice in the temporary, sure, but trying to derive why you should actually really do those things, there's no grounding for it on an atheist level. There just isn't. It's really just the offspring of the sociobiological chemical functions that are going on within you. You know what I mean? You don't have a you. Who are you? When I ask you this, are you going to tell me that you're your brain? Because the majority of people would think that they are just a brain in a vat. And so, I mean, it's really just meaningless, pitless indifference, whether you actually pay it forward for somebody else in the end.
Okay. Well, in that sense, why does it matter then?
Right. That is the deep, profound question. Why does it matter?
Yeah. So I'm asking you, why does it matter if it's meaningful to God or not?
Humans have this innate desire to have meaning, for things to be purposeful. It is innate inside of us. And so because of that, this is a meaningful conversation because we want to know truth. This is why you're on here today. And this is why I'm on here today, is because I believe that I have the truth. And I care about you so much that I want to tell you the truth. Trust me, if I didn't have God, I would be out in a strip club, just doing as whatever I wanted. I'm not kidding you. I would.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I don't doubt that.
Yeah, right.
And it sounds like that works for you, yet I don't do that. I don't do that now. So
Right.
so that's not very compelling to me. That's not moving to me personally. Because there is no desire to go to a strip club. There's no desire to do something like that. What I'm trying to understand from you is if, we kind of are going in circles, and I'm just, what I'm still struggling to understand from you is, if that's the case, then what is keeping me from doing that?
Yeah, I think that's something that you have to ask yourself. And again, it goes back to
Well, I know the answer for me.
why.
I'm asking you what you think.
Yeah, so every human has that innate resistance to not do things. It's the consciousness that God has divinely created man in his own image. He has created an essence of himself in you. So for the very fact that you can be a moral agent is credited to God. That's why you can be morally a moral atheist. You know what I mean? It's just to say that the problem is sin. We have fallen short of the glory of God. And because of sin, we just don't have a solution unless we invoke what Jesus has done.
Okay. Let me ask you this then. How would I live better if I started believing in God? Let's just say you convince me 2 minutes from now that it's time to believe in God. Let's just imagine that happens. What do you think my life would look like from that point on? Like, what would I do differently?
Sure. I think that you would perceive humanity different in the aspect that they are created in the image of God. I believe that you would preach to them the gospel of Jesus, in which you can receive this free gift of salvation, that God sent himself into the earth to unalive himself for the ramification of sin, because the shedding of blood and being sinless is what was needed in order to resolve the spiritual death. The fact that we need, the fact that we do die is indicative of the spiritual death. We were created to be eternal. This is why we have a spirit, but now that we are wrapped in this flesh, the flesh is going to die. I believe that you would be an encourager. I do see that on you. You would really edify a lot of people through your past struggles and experiences. And I believe that you would testify about the goodness of God, of what he has done for you. I believe that you would perceive the universe as not pitless indifference, just existing, but it was actually designed, the teleological argument for the existence of God, that it's fine-tuned, that it was in place for you. I even believe that you would be a better husband due to the fact that you would invoke God.
And how would you suppose that would, okay, so I can see the part of preaching, is that I'm just boiling it down to one word, and testifying and preaching. I could see that. I'm not sure what you mean by I would see humanity in a different light. Like, how do I see them now versus how I would see them if I were a believer?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I should have asked you, how do you perceive humanity apart from them not being created in the image of God?
That's a very broad question. A broad answer would be, I see value in humanity, and I see anything as having life as valuable. I see anything as having life as valuable. I see that in the sense of every person who is here has bucked the odds to be here, to exist. There is the odds of when a sperm and an egg get together and that fetus surviving 9 months those are astronomically low odds, especially like in the first trimester. Many pregnancies don't go to term just naturally for many, 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 many reasons. And I'm not even talking about like man-made reasons. I'm talking just natural, happenstance reasons. You may say God, I say happenstance, but I think you see what I'm saying. I think you know what I mean. So the fact that every single person on this earth has overcome tremendous odds simply to exist, that gives them, all by itself, that gives them value. They're valuable people, and they're rare and they're special. Even though there's 8 billion of us on this planet, we are still rare and special. And so to me, that means that every single person's life is worth protecting, cherishing, holding dear. And that's evidenced by at least somebody loves somebody else. At least one person loves one other person in this world. So that to me signals that if there are people out there who hold you dear, who love you just because of who you are, then that makes you a valuable person. So that's how I see humanity now.
Do you not believe that somebody loved you enough for you to have the ability to have a life? And not apart from your parents, but from ever existing?
Well, it depends what you mean by that, because in all honesty, I was an accident. And so that didn't mean that my parents didn't love me after I came into this world. It just meant that, I just found out later in adulthood that I was an accident. And so I think from that standpoint, yes, my parents did love me enough to for me to exist and survive in this world and nurture me. And they did the best they could to raise me. So from that standpoint, yes. From the other standpoint, that means by extension that my grandparents loved my parents enough so that they would be able to have me, and so on and so on and so on. So yeah, so from that standpoint, yes.
So
I would say that's true.
You don't see the parallel between how God has brought us into the world because he loved us so much to give us life, to give us the very breath that we breathe. Your parents didn't give you that. Your parents didn't give you, they can only, just replicate and multiply. But they did not have the essence to create you. What they had was already borrowed information to be able to produce life. But we, as ourselves, did not create humanity. We could only replicate humanity. So we must give credence where credence is due.
Okay, so that's an interesting point you bring up. So we must give credence where credence is due. And what exactly does that mean? We must give credence where credence is due.
Well, for the very fact that we don't even know how to create a cow scientifically, we just don't. The materials that we are, with all the matter, all the blood, all the systems in our body are so intricate and beautiful, despite what we may see now after the fall of man, with deformities and cancer and sickness and disease and mental illnesses. That's not good. But God's creation, inevitably, from the very beginning in Genesis, when he states that he created it, it was good. We are an amazing, awesome piece of work done by the Creator. And so it wouldn't be fair to give us credit for creating ourselves, because we didn't. We didn't have any act in creation. We had the act of replication. And God has already given us the tools, right, to be able to do the birds and the bees and to be able to do the act. And in part, that gift of love making is a gift. It's a beautiful, profound spiritual experience to feel what God felt when He created us,
Mm.
brought everything into existence.
Okay, so let me ask you this then, because that's my name, Trust But Verify. So when you said, "Hey, I'm looking for the truth," you're absolutely right about that. So what I'm asking from you is, when I say, what credence is giving credence where credence is due, like everything you said after that, I just don't believe. So what evidence do you have that any of that is true?
Right. So humanity for thousands of years has worshipped the creature rather than the creator. You have thousands of religions worshiping bulls, worshiping animals, worshiping this, but they'll never give credence to God, who is the one that actually created and designed you.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the pitfall of humanity, is that we would rather worship the earth and idols rather than the spirit of the living God who designed you. That's who we need to give credence to. We must, and it's innate ability to give that credence is whenever you look at a painting, right? You don't just believe that, well, man, that must have really, really organized itself scientifically through a process of natural selection. And,
Okay.
that's who we give credence to, is just the process. But it really didn't
Okay.
have any intentionality behind it. Even though it's beautiful, it was just a mere random act of processes.
Okay. So I guess what I'm asking you is, why should I give credence to God? Why should I?
He deserves it.
And why is that?
Well, he is God, and we are not. And so for the very aspect that he is God and we are not, I mean, it's the very thing that he spoke to Job about. Did you, you know, spin forth the universe? Did you bring about the stars? Did you hang up the sun and the sky? I mean, it's all reverting back to, oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't create
Okay.
the trees. I didn't create the animals. I didn't create.
Okay. Well, I see what you're saying. So let's just say that there is a God. And let's just say that, so let's just say I found out there's a God. And God did all these things. I'm still not clear on why I should worship a God. Why ought I worship a God? Why does that obligate me?
I got to respond to divine healing prayers. What do you mean that isn't a sufficient answer to where he is? Or maybe you're talking to somebody else. No, I believe it's a sufficient answer to worship God because he is due that. Again, it's by his nature. The very fact that he did not have to create you, right? The same way that your parents didn't have to do the act, even though, despite you were an accident, have the ability to experience life. Life is a gift.
Yeah.
And for the very fact that we desire to live, every human wants to live, you must answer why. Why do we want to live? Why do we want to flourish? Because God is good and he is the giver of life. He is the one who makes everything flourish. So you must give credit to God.
I don't necessarily agree with that. Everybody wants to live. Because again, in my years in recovery, I've met many, many, many people who have expressly told me they don't want to live. And so that they see no point in it and all that stuff.
They never always believe that, though.
That they saw no reason to live.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm just telling you what people have told me. And whether or not they were actually, I can't speak to their state of mind, because none of us are mind readers, honestly. So I'm not a mind reader. I can only go by what they're telling me and how they, and their demeanor, how they act. And they sure as heck acted like they didn't want to be here. I'm just saying that, um, you know, I think it's fair to say I didn't ask to be here. So I didn't tell my parents to do that, right? I couldn't
Right.
have.
Right.
And then by extension, and it's not, and I'm not saying that it's about my wants. What I'm saying is, um, just because a God has the ability to create, why ought I worship and obey that God? Why does that obligate me? And
Right.
and it just falls short when you just say because he's God. Well, what does that mean? Why should I care?
Well, it's by his nature of who he is. He is love. He is peace. He is truth. He is righteous. He is holy. All of these are very good answers as to why. I mean, I don't know of anybody else who is all of that on planet Earth other than God. No one compares.
I yeah I Well, let me put it like this. Um, and this is a bit of an equivalence. It's just a smaller equivalency. But are there people who don't want to obey the president of the United States? Like if you ask them, you should do what the president of the United States tells you to do. Aren't there people out there who would say, why should I? He's not my president. I didn't vote for that guy. Just whatever reasons. And it doesn't matter who's the president. You will find people out there like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of like the same thing. Is I kind of see their point. Other than, well, he doesn't exactly create laws. It's more of a figurehead. So that's kind of where the equivalency ends. But it's kind of the closest thing I can come to it. So what would happen to me if I didn't obey God?
Yeah. So, I mean, again, there are ramifications for separating yourself from the relationship that he wants to have with you.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that humans were created to have the divine connection with him, to enjoy who he is and his
Right.
creation. And so, therefore, by cutting yourself off, self mutilating yourself essentially from him, what you're doing is you're saying, I don't want to worship you. I don't want to bow down to you. I don't love you. I don't want anything to do with you. Let me live my life in accordance to how I want to. Even
Mm-hmm.
though, you didn't create yourself. You didn't create the universe. You didn't create the very food that you enjoy eating. You did not create um, anything. So it's just selfishness. It's, in the human condition. I believe it.
Well, how is that selfish though, relentless, if I didn't choose to be here? And if I didn't choose to be here and all of those things are required of me to exist, and I just want to exist, then why is that selfish? Because the way I see it is, if God wants me to be here, well, then why would God want me to be here?
Because he loves you.
He loves me. Okay. And if he loves me, because like if you had a parent that said they love you and you never heard from them, what would you think of that parent?
Yeah, absolutely. I would not believe that they love me if I never heard from them.
Right, right. And then someone said to
Actually,
you,
no, I
but
retract that. I'm sorry. I retract my statement. Actually, because I'm adopted. So I actually don't know my biological parents.
Mm,
Does that mean that they never love me? Because I've never heard from them. I don't know who they are. Nothing.
okay. So by extension, then that means you owe them something.
Well, it's not to say that they didn't love me. It's just to say that due to the circumstance, I never had the ability to acknowledge who they were. I was very
Right,
little.
right. Yeah,
But that
yeah, I
doesn't
hear that.
equate, yeah, it doesn't equate to them not loving me. I think
Right.
what you're trying to do is equating that to God because you've never experienced him like you should have or what you think you should have. Therefore, you don't believe that he loves you.
Now, and if we're kind of getting onto a soft spot, just let me know and we can move
Oh,
on.
not
But
at all. Not at all.
okay. Because I could see it on one hand. Let's just say, and I'm just trying to do a parallel, so it goes both ways. So the equivalent of your birth parents have written a bunch of letters to you and they never got delivered, right? So you never knew what they were thinking, right? And let's just say that happened between me and God. All right. In that sense, if that happened between you and your birth parents, what do you owe them at that point?
If I never received the letters?
Yeah, let's just say, and at the end of life, you found out, or just some time later when it was too late, like maybe at the end of after they've lived, and then suddenly someone says to you, "Oh, you know what? I found a stack of return mail, all addressed to you, Relentless." And you go through them and you read them, and it's heartfelt, it's emotional, and they explained everything. You see where I'm going with this? They answered every question that you had about that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, what do you owe them?
Well, I guess I would owe them gratitude. I would owe them the appreciation that they did that throughout those years, despite not personally knowing who they were or ever hearing from their lips that they love me or care for me or receiving a physical hug from them or any of those things. But I mean, the parents that I have now are my real parents. They're the ones that
For
raised
sure.
me. They're the ones that invested their time into me, living life with me alongside of me. So I wouldn't be indifferent towards, the alternative there.
Right.
Because
And I hear
there's
that.
no sense of
Yeah,
emotional attachment to them because I never knew them,
I totally get that. And I probably be the same. Now, as things stand now, what do you owe your birth parents? Do you owe them that same amount that everything that you just described, or is it different now?
Despite not knowing them, I would still love them. I would
Okay.
still appreciate the fact that they, I came from him and came from her, and there's gratitude there. I'm thankful for that. But to the degree of, the love that I would have for my adoptive parents, it's going to be way different because they
Sure.
actually invested in me.
Yeah, because they invested in you, and because they were present, right?
Correct. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So they were present. So if someone came up to you now and said, "You know what? You owe your birth parents X, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and this is more than what you think you owe them now," how would you receive that? Let's just say somebody coming up to you and said, you owe your birth parents $1 million. How would you receive that?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's not even comparable. But I see what you're doing. And I do believe that for the very fact, again, it would just go back to at least acknowledging that you were created by God, at least acknowledging that He is the one that created everything into existence and sprung it forth. But the true intimacy will not happen until you know Him, right?
How do you acknowledge something you don't believe?
Well, again, it's hardwired. It's innate inside of humans to believe that we came from something higher than us. I believe it's the most profound question. Why does anything exist rather than just simply nothing? Um,
Okay.
these are
Okay.
deep, profound questions. So
Hmm.
again, I think it's hardwired in us to ponder and percolate those questions. So
Well,
that's the beginning point.
hmm. Now I don't disagree with that. I I don't think you will find many atheists who will say we came from nothing. I don't think you will find very, very few who believe that. I mean, we're not a monolith, right? So we all have our different opinions and viewpoints. I,
Hmm.
for one, don't believe that. I believe that the existence came from something, whatever that something is. I just
Correct.
don't know what.
Sure.
What I'm saying though is there's no credible evidence that points to a creator. That's my belief. That's my point of view. So when you see things in the world and you say, "Oh, that's because of creator," I don't see the same thing.
Sure.
I see it completely. It's almost like, yeah, it's just that we just have different sets of eyes, and we perceive things a different way.
Right, because it goes back
And
to when you asked. Oh, I'm sorry to cut you off. Go ahead.
no, no, go ahead and go ahead and finish what you were saying.
No, I guess it was going back to correct. If you were a believer, you would see through a different lens. Most certainly would. And I
Right.
think, again, it goes back to my other point, that humanity, immediately when we're born, we're at enmity towards God. We don't want to believe that He exists. We don't want to be accountable. We don't want um, Him involved in any area of our life because of the sin problem. And we as humans don't like to be accountable. I mean, really, it plays
Hmm.
out here on earth, right? With law and order, when people steal, when people schmurder, when people uh, do all sorts of wild things, right? Why do they do them? Because they are uh, crossing the chicken line again, breaking the resistors, and surpassing our conscious, I, innate given ability to reason, which God has given us. Even though we might be an unbeliever and not in Him, it still exists
Hmm.
in us. It's written on our hearts. But
Hmm.
we as
Hmm.
humans, well, yeah, I mean, it's not like you needed to have somebody tell you that Schmurder was wrong, right? You didn't have to have anybody tell you that. You innately knew that, and especially growing up and looking around you and seeing that this was not a flourishing, beneficial thing for humanity, um, you already knew it. Along with grape. Grape is not good in any way, shape, or form. And I don't believe that you would ever have the propensity or even the thought to want to do that. But that's solely based because of what God has innately wired you in, right?
Hmm.
It's not until, a Jeffrey Dahmer comes around, right? If you look at his life and you look at all the trauma and the pain and all the craziness that he had to deal with his environmental factors that led to him breaking those resistors, breaking those, you know,
Okay. So, what would it take for you then? Because you've kind of brought up a few things. You brought up the morality piece of it, and you brought up the something from nothing piece. So we've got a few reasons floating around here. So I want to stick to one. If you had to choose one as your strongest belief, which one would it be? Like if one were demonstrated to be proven otherwise, like we'll start with morality. So if you found out that morality didn't come from a god, what would that do to your belief in your God, like your confidence that God is real?
yeah, if morality certainly did not derive from God, which I would presume with my premise that objective moral values and duties wouldn't exist if God doesn't exist. So if that is not present, everything is permissible. And there is no true justice for what I do
Right.
because it's just jail. But that's not
Okay.
real justice. That's just being closed in a box. That's not dealing with the intrinsic problem.
Okay. And I asked, what would that do to your confidence that God is real if you found that out, and verified to your satisfaction that it's true?
Yeah, I mean, it would completely shoot it down if objective moral values and duties.
It would you stop believing, or would it just kind of lower your confidence?
Well, if our morality didn't derive from God, I mean, yeah. I mean, how could I base my own actions of why I do things the way that I do them if it's not in credence to how God would desire me to live? Because subjective morality, it just fails. I don't see it working.
What would subjective morality look like in your worldview, in your eyes? If subjective morality were a thing, what would it look like?
Yeah,
like for example, what would it look like? Yeah,
Papua New Guinea, they believe that cannibalism is okay. Here in America, we predominantly don't perceive that cannibalism is okay, but due to their subjective relativism of understanding that, well, no, this is a good thing. This is what we do ritually. This is what we do to appease our gods. This is okay for us. And I mean, how would you combat that in your atheistic worldview of that, you know?
Number one, I wouldn't go to Papua New Guinea. That's number one. The second one is it's concentrated on that island, and I would not go out of my way to, I don't agree with it morally. And as long as if there were a band of Papua New Guineans, I don't even know if that's a correct way to refer them to, that were and people were just disappearing off the street in the United States, well, then I would, and we could, with good evidence, point back to that, yeah, they're running out of people to cannibalize, and so they're starting to come to America. Or even if they start infiltrating other countries, I would likely be in support of, you know what, we may want to send some troops over there and kind of tell them that's not the way to go. That's probably what I would do. It sounds like it's a very isolated thing, because I have heard of it, but I haven't heard it like something like what I just described. So in that sense, I don't agree with it morally. And there are a lot of things I don't agree with morally that people do, yet I let them do what they want to do. And I don't go out of my way unless it is really, really harming people. And to me, that doesn't seem to be really, really harming people. Now, because that seems to be pretty low on the radar of, things to worry about, if that makes sense.
I just want to thank whoever sent me corn. That's a lot of corn.
That is a lot of corn.
What in the world?
So I guess what I'm trying to understand from you is if God is the objective, that if God meets the objective, then I'm trying to understand then why in some situations, like say in the Bible, unaliving is okay, grape is okay, and in some situations it's not.
Right. So that's a very, very broad aspect of what you're talking about, and I know that you know that.
Well, you would agree, though, that has happened in the Bible, right?
There are situations within Scripture where God has supposedly and appeared to look like an atrocity, or appeared to look like a supposed ethnic cleansing, or that slavery is advocated and all this. I mean, this is nothing new.
Yeah, it's nothing new, and I'm not going to get in the weeds about that. What I'm trying to keep it very general. What I'm trying to understand is if it's, because I'm trying to hit on, well, I guess let me back up a little bit. Let me get your definition of what objective morality means, and then what subjective morality means.
Well, I mean, to perceive that something is objectively true, it stands alone apart from human opinion. There is no
Starts
human
alone.
opinion with objective. Something being objectively true is self-sufficient and
Okay.
understanding it, self-explanatory.
Okay. And so we're on the same page. What is something that you think is objectively true that you and I would both agree is objectively true?
Well, again, I think that we would agree on the idea that cannibalism is wrong in any culture.
Yeah.
There's no need
Okay.
for it. Yeah.
Okay. And so, so going by that, so, well, I mean, if we want to pull that as an example, let's go back to what you were saying about, things that appeared to be genocidal, things that appeared to be this and that in the Bible. What I'm trying to understand then is why was the appearance so, yet why it looked like, say, genocide, but it actually wasn't? Why is that the case?
Well, in the Old Testament, in a general aspect, the game was very different back then. The culture was very different. The way that things had to be solidified for what God wanted to be done, it looked very wild. I'm not going to lie. But there are good reasons of why God had to allow things to happen. There are good reasons for God in his sovereignty to permit those things. It's the whole idea of disobedience, obedience, disobedience, obedience. And there are consequences, just as we see in the natural, right, here on earth in modern times. Well, if you're going to obey the law, right, you put your seatbelt on and you don't drink and drive, there are going to be good consequences. You're going to drive good. But if you don't do those things in obedience, you might unalive somebody or 3 or 4 people in a car. And so this is a lot of what is going on in the Old Testament. And it does look grotesque. It does look wild. I'm not going to lie. Paul Copan actually wrote a good book about it. It's called Is God a Moral Monster?
God, a Moral Monster. I've read it. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, you've read it?
Yeah.
Okay. So then you understand. Or maybe you just don't like what he says in the book about it. But
I understand what he said. Yeah, I don't agree with it, but I understand.
Okay.
What I'm trying to understand, but my point in asking you these things is I don't want to understand what he said, because I do understand that. I want to understand what you think. And because I'm trying to understand your beliefs like inside out, because I'm trying to get into your shoes. I think that for me personally, if I'm going to be convinced, then I have to understand it from your perspective. So I'm almost trying to get into your brain. And, and so that's why I ask these questions. So
sure.
Kind of going back. Yeah. So, and so going back to that, if that's the case, then what circumstances today would have to occur for God to return to Old Testament acts?
Well, in the modern times now that we see, there are consequences to sinful actions. You will reap what you sow. And so, right? So because somebody murdered somebody, you're not just going to get away with that in the long term. God will keep you accountable in the present. But God rather would show mercy than judgment as well. So there is that dichotomy of God showing mercy, which he does in the Old Testament as well.
He does. Yeah.
Even with Sodom and Gomorrah. Oh, God, if there's only 10, would you just spare the city? Oh, God, if you would only, spare it if there are only 5. And, the number just keeps going down. So, I mean, there are aspects in which God does bend his knee towards humanity in the aspect of lessening a punishment or judgment.
Okay, let me stop you right there because I have another question about that. So doesn't that sound arbitrary? Like completely at God's discretion?
Well, God must judge sin.
Sure.
He is a just judge.
Okay, and so does that mean then that what may look like judgment for one, that two different people committing the same sin could get different judgment?
Well, sin is sin in the Bible. I mean, there is no
Right.
greater or lesser sin
Right.
in those regards. God chooses to show mercy on whom he chooses to show mercy on. Otherwise, he is the just judge. I cannot
Right.
explain why he does that, but since he is the most superior being in the universe who knows the hearts of men, and we do not know the hearts of men, I can't account for why somebody else has shown more mercy or grace than someone else. I can't give you that.
Okay. So in that case then, because it just sounds like you agreed with me. It sounds like, yes, two different people could get different judgment if they commit the same sin. So are you agreeing with me or are you disagreeing with me?
Judgment may manifest differently for each individual.
Okay, so then that's a yes, right?
Yeah, the discretion of severity, how would that look? I don't know.
Right. I'm just saying it can be different.
Mm-hmm.
It's discretionary. Okay. So discretionary, isn't that another way to say subjective?
God chooses in his reasoning to allow that.
Yes. So that's subjective. It's subject to God's judgment, right?
Correct. Subject to God's judgment. Right?
Okay. So I'm trying to now I'm struggling because you just said it's objective morality. It's not the human standard. However, it is a standard subject to God's authority and judgment.
So morality is objective, but there's a personal understanding of how God subjectively chooses to judge that particular sin in accordance to that human.
Is it possible then that somebody could not worship God and still get into heaven?
Well, you have to have a relationship with Jesus in order to get to heaven.
Well, you just said it is subject to God's ultimate judgment and discretion. So
yeah, but
doesn't that mean then that it's possible to not worship God and still get into heaven?
Well, no, he gives the guidelines for that, for sure.
Right. But but he's given guidelines for other things and it hasn't always gone that way. So how do we know that is an absolute line? The chicken line, as you say. I like that line. I like that term, by the way. So how do we know that's an absolute chicken line that if you cross, there's no going back? How do we absolutely know that?
Well, people have clinically died and have come back to life and have described the ramifications of not receiving Jesus. Yeah, we have that aspect, but we also have
that aspect.
The understanding of Lazarus in hell, the rich man.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't happen. What I'm asking you though, is it possible that a person can cross that chicken line of not worshiping God and still get into heaven? Because if you said, and if not, how do we know that's not discretionary? Because if we've shown, and if you said to me, well, these things, it is ultimately discretion. It is ultimately God's discretion. That would include not worshiping God, right?
Well, you could look at the thief on the cross, right? So the thief on the cross didn't exactly live a full-blown Christian life, right? But he just said, "I believe" at the end, right? Yeah. In that very moment, Jesus knew that that's what the thief on the cross wanted.
Yeah.
He desired to know him and have that relationship with him, despite the fact that he didn't worship God, so to speak, throughout his whole time on earth.
And I'm not saying that because you're giving me a lot of examples and I appreciate that. What I'm saying though is that because I see a discrepancy of two things that were said earlier, and I'm trying to get you to really clearly define what that means. So are you saying then that if you don't worship God, obey God, 100% no chance you get into heaven? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you must receive the free gift of salvation, of what he did on the cross. Yeah, that's a must.
Got it. That's a must. It's an absolute must. There's no delineate. So then that means, in that sense, then God. So then, what I'm trying to understand then, that God holds that one line, yet God can forgive these other things. That it's possible to, because you did say earlier, judgment is within God's discretion, except for that. So I'm just struggling to understand then why God decided to constrain that one thing. Why God decided to implement that one constraint.
Well, that's the most important.
So because it's the most important. So we have to worship God above everything else.
Right. He's the number one thing. Correct.
Okay. So I could be a mass unaliver. As long as I worship God, I'm good.
Yeah, so you're bringing that dichotomy of saying, can I just live a sinful life, but yet still get into heaven?
Well, because you brought up Jeffrey Dahmer earlier, and reports were that Jeffrey Dahmer, repented and took, accepted Jesus as his personal savior. And so odds are Jeffrey Dahmer's in heaven.
Yeah, it's the same thing with the thief on the cross.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so it would, and the thing is I struggle to understand that. Mm-hmm. And the reason for my struggle with that, Relentless, is because I don't see how worship is more important than valuing human life, than not stealing, than, not graping, things like that. What compelling reason can you give me other than because God deserves it?
Well, I do have to close this story, Cricket Wireless. I do want to no, I really do, but I do appreciate
no worries.
Everything you're allowing me up. I'm going to give you a follow, and I would love to talk to you again.
Sure, yeah, come on back.
We've talked a long time, and I'm sure maybe somebody else wants to jump up.
I do have people in the queue, so they're probably they can probably pick up where you left off. Yes, but I appreciate the follow, and this has been a good talk.
Yes, seriously, this has probably been the best coherent conversation that I've had with a non-believer. You've been very respectful, and I do appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely, and you as well. So I enjoyed the conversation, Relentless, and you're welcome back anytime. So yeah, come on back. I appreciate it. All right, well, enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you. You too.
All right, take care.